Hello, welcome to chapter 12. In this chapter, focusing on, of course, food and beverage industry, we will examine the ways in which revenue managers analyze their sources of income by revenue centers, day part, and service styles. Also, methods revenue managers use to accurately measure and assess revenue increases and decreases. And also an examination of three alternative methods revenue managers use to measure their revenue generation efficiency. Now, revenue managers should ask themselves some questions, right? First, what is our total revenue? Second, how much revenue does each revenue center contribute to our sales? In the third question, are we experiencing an increase in revenue or decrease, and by how much? And how effectively are we using our space and staff to generate sales? Now, in order to answer these questions, we need to understand what we mean by revenue centers or day parts or service styles and how can we examine them. When we say revenue center, we mean that any subsection or parts of business that contributes to operations total income. This depends on what do you want to focus on. For example, in a single restaurant, you can divide the service area into, let's say, two parts. For example, bar area and dining area. Or if you have more than multiple location, you have multiple location, then you can divide into different location A, location B, location C. The idea here, besides the big picture, like total revenue of all locations or total revenue of all restaurants, you want to understand more detailed picture so you can have a better idea on what to do next. Now let us follow the book example. In this example, there are 5 different units generating average of 80,000 if we look at just the bigger picture, right? However, when we divide into separate revenue centers, we can see that 4 of them generate over 100,000, but unit 3 generates only 50,000. Considering there is a limited information and assuming these units are similar, that we can easily say unit 3 needs a closer look, which we will also talk in a little more detail soon. We can also calculate revenue center contribution from these values. Now, this is how you calculate. In order to calculate revenue center contribution, we divide revenue center sales to total revenue. Let us look at a couple examples, let's say for unit 3 and unit 4. So you can see that is the one of them is the 12.5% and unit 4 is 28.75%, more than double amount. The point is you need to know dollar amount generated by each revenue source and what proportion of total sales comes from each revenue sources. But once again, we are assuming that in this location example, they are comparable. We already know that there are different divisions and demands depending on the time of the day. For example, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can arrange however you want. Once again, you need to arrange these times depending on how detailed information you need. In this case, we focused on the like I said, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But let's say you want the more information, you can an hourly, right? As a matter of fact, you can go also it could be meal periods, similar here. It could be per hours or also daily. Depends on what you want to know. In this example, similar to revenue centers, we can calculate the day part contribution. Let us look at let's say lunch contribution. As we can see, this coffee shop is very good with breakfast, but lunch is not working well. We should maybe do more investigation. The basic idea, however, dividing revenue into sections so we can have more focused look what is working and what is not working. We can check into more detailed information. So far, we tried to understand where is our revenue coming from. Revenue centers, and when it is generated. By day parts. However, considering many restaurants start to look different service options during and after the COVID, analyzing your service styles, meaning formats you use to generate revenue, is also important. First thing we look at is drive-through. We already know that almost all quick service restaurants have drive-thrus, and generate majority of their revenues, which is estimated about 70% in this format, in drive-through format. Now, one of the most important thing about drive-through is speed. You don't want people to wait on their car too long, and plus, considering the limited space, potential customers will go to competitors if they see long lines. Other thing to consider is order accuracy, customer service, and food quality and taste, of course. Now, according to some research, it shows that 7-second reduction in drive-through service could increase sale by about 1%. Let us not forget, in restaurants, prices are not easily changed. So as revenue managers, part of our job is the increasing the people served in order to increase revenue. So speed is important, as well as accuracy of the order with well-designed system. Now, second format is carryout. From the revenue manager's perspective, well-designed ordering and communication system is important. People can still come to your property and order the food to go, but most likely they will order using electronic mediums such as like apps they have. If your property has a strong carryout business, it is good idea to track separately from other revenue streams and consider things associated with the carryout, such as point of sale systems that's connected to like apps, or the ordering system, payments, even the like parking space when the people come to pick the order up. Now, delivery used to be associated with operating such as like a pizza places, right? Or similar places. However, especially during and after COVID, made this an option for many restaurants. Even high-scale restaurants start to offer employing gig economy, such as DoorDash, GopPAR, Uber Eats, etc. Last thing is, of course, more traditional one, meaning dine-ins. Before we start the revenue change measures, I want to repeat what I already talked several times, and most likely I'm going to repeat as well. We can increase revenue by increasing check average, meaning the amount purchased per guest, and people comes to our business, meaning the number of guests served. It is easy to differentiate both check average and guests served. If there is let's say there is a increase or decrease in the both places, is easily, like both check average increase, guest service increase, is easy to see. However, let's say the check average increased but guest served decreased. If you look only to revenue change, we might not able to understand the change, because from just the revenue perspective, revenue won't change a lot. Like, if there is a one increase, another decrease, it balances out. But when you go into look in more detail, then we can start to understand the check average increased or guest service increased, or which one is decreased. So it's kind of a little bit more detailed information you need. Now, next couple of slides, we will talk about revenue changes. First thing we need to understand is the term accounting period. Whenever you do any kind of calculations, you need to define a time period you are comparing to. It could be hours, days, weeks, years, etc. For example, here we are in this example using a year. In order to calculate, we get the difference between the years. For example, if we are getting last year's and this year's sales with their contributions, in this example, we are just looking at last year's and this year's sales. However, we also want to see how much change. In this example, we can calculate first, of course, the difference, right? If you look at the food, 2,058,376 minus 1,891,011 gives us $167,365. So our revenue increased. Similarly, we also want to see percentage increase. So we take the variance, meaning the difference, in this case is a positive 167,365. We can divide that to last year's value, and that gives us positive 8.9%. In this calculation, be sure to check sign of your value if positive or negative. So because it shows the decrease or increase. Depending on the reason of variance, this calculation could be utilized in order to make some revenue management decisions. For example, in this case, there is an increase. We can consider 4 different reasons, right? First, we might be serving same number of people with higher check average, or more guests with the same check average, or more guests and higher check average, or few guests but much higher check average. If we don't know the details, we just look at the revenue. But if we know the details, if we know those numbers, we can have some educated guesses, right? For example, let's say we are getting much higher check average, but for fewer guests. So for short term, it might be okay for revenue because revenue increase with the very big, very high check averages. But in the long term, declining guest numbers could create a problem. When evaluating sales variances, revenue managers need to consider all relevant factors. There are many factors to consider, such as the number of operating meal periods, or days, menu prices, guest count, check averages, holidays, and other special events. A revenue manager's most accurate information regarding revenue growth or decrease will be usually based on daily sales, customer counts, and check averages for a particular accounting period. In this example, we look at the month of January and calculate directly. If we calculate it directly, we see that we made $200 less, right? If you compare last January to this January, we made less money, or negative 1.2%. However, when we consider how many days this property operated, we can see that last year they operated 22 days in January. In this example, this was a food truck in the business district, so it works only Monday to Friday. So the point is, when we incorporate the daily performance, we can see that on a day-to-day basis, this January, on average, it was making 3.6% better than last January. Point I'm trying to make is sometimes you need to understand exactly what you are calculating. If you go stuck in the initial one, we are losing money. But when we consider, hey, you know what, last January we worked less or more, it depends on what you're calculating, then value changes. Now, in a hotel industry, we have STR reports giving the industry, like, if you look at the Simul Travel Research STR reports, if you remember from the earlier chapters, is giving the industry many statistics, right, regarding the whole industry. In addition, STR also provides many competition-related data. However, in the restaurant industry, those kind of data is not readily available. I mean, the National Restaurant Association provides some long-term forecasting, but overall, restaurant industry need to rely on their own internal performance measures. Now, of course, we are following the book, so we are focusing on these 3 key revenue-related factors: facility use, labor usage, and capacity, but there could be some other approaches as well, but we're going to focus in the book for this. Now, it is logical to understand that larger restaurants will have more space, more tables, seats, and will be able to serve more guests compared to smaller properties. However, larger the sizes, more costly the occupation cost is going to be. So when we say occupation cost, we are talking about the cost associated with the rent, insurance, utilities, etc. So we need a KPI, key performance indicator, to calculate operations' physical size to its ability to bring income. This is statistics called revenue per square feet. As the name implies, in order to calculate revenue per square foot, we divide a total revenue to total square footage occupied. For example, if we have $900,000 revenue and 1,500 square foot occupied, we make $600 revenue per square foot. Now, why is this important? Because it shows your efficient use of space as a manager. There are many different ways to calculate the labor. Similar to physical space efficiency, we use, for example, physical space efficiency, we use the revenue per square foot, right? We also need to see if we are efficient in one of the major costs in restaurant industry, as you can guess, is the labor cost. So we can calculate it by dividing total revenue to labor hours used to get revenue per labor hour. If you look at this example, we can see that they calculated revenue per labor hours for different weeks. It seems that week 4 was most efficient week and week 3 was the least efficient. However, let us not forget that this calculation does not consider how much we pay for labor, but focus on hourly labor efficiency, or more specifically, scheduling efficiency. This measurement is kind of new and mostly related to table turnover at restaurants. As we talked about it before, we can affect the price or how many guests we can serve for a given time period, right? We talk about this many times. This measurement focuses on important aspect of selling space, right? We in the restaurants, we don't only sell food, but we sell space that people sit there. And this calculated by dividing total revenue to total available seat hours. For example, if you look at this restaurant, our performance of this restaurant, we can see that the restaurant opens at 5 and closes at 10 p.m. Because it operates 5 hours and has 100 seats available, so total available seat hour is going to be 500. During those 5 hours, they served 400 guests and generated a total of $20,350. Now, check average from 400 guests were $50.88. And if we divide the total revenue to total available seats, meaning full available capacity, our RevPASH is going to be $40.70. Now, if you look at this, you might come up with many ideas, but I mean, just looking at this in general, we might say that it could be a good idea to close at 11 instead of 10, considering there is 100% capacity between 9 and 10. One other idea could be offering some kind of promotion between 5 and 6 p.m., right? So people can come because we need to fill those seats. And maybe also possible to consider fast prepared, fast consumed promotional items between 7 and 10 p.m. so we can utilize faster table turnover. I mean, you can maybe come up with some other ideas as well. Now, let's talk about the 6 strategies for increasing RevPASH, right? First one is the regularly monitor RevPASH by revenue center and day part. In simple terms, revenue managers need to focus on measuring the right things to make food service business successful. One of the most important things to measure is the selling efficiency, which can be done by tracking a metric called RevPASH. By carefully analyzing RevPASH, revenue managers can identify areas for improvement and take steps to increase revenue. Essentially, measuring the right thing is the key to optimizing revenue and making food service business successful. Second is related to maximizing table and sitting flexibility. Now, in order to increase the percentage of seats being used in the restaurant, it is important to have flexible seating arrangements. One way to effectively manage seating is by using maybe computer-based table management systems. Additionally, there are some tricks, right? It is important to avoid seating guests at tables that are too large for their party size. I mean, there is 3 people came and there is a table for 6, I'm just making up. As this can lead to wasted seats and decreased utilization percentage. Now, being mindful of seating arrangements and utilizing technology to manage tables, restaurants can maximize their seating capacity and increase revenue. Now, next one is related to differential pricing, right? We talk about differential pricing in many chapters. Now, revenue managers in the lodging industry know that offering discounts during periods of low demand can help boost revenue. Now, food service manager can adopt a similar strategy by targeting periods of low seat utilization and offering special and promotions with reduced prices on food and beverages. By doing so, they can increase the likelihood of filling seats during slower times and generating additional revenue. It is important for food service managers and actually any kind of managers to understand the value of strategic pricing and promotions in order to maximize revenue opportunities. Now, next one is the managing reservation is related to actually maximizing table as well, but restaurants can optimize revenue by using computer-based reservation management system that interface with their point of sale system. This helps ensure that advanced reservations are taken for the right size group and at the right time, improving service efficiency and maximizing revenue opportunities. And last one is the staff utilization, right? Efficient food preparation and service are important, but timely table clearing, payment processing, and appropriate staffing are also critical in maximizing seat utilization and revenue in busy periods. Okay, thank you for watching.